Welcome to the Catholic Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Matt Pinto. As Catholics, you hear me say this often. God affirmed the goodness of the world, and we would contend that all aspects of the world, in and of themselves, are either neutral or good, including the business world. And that's really what we're here to talk about, that intersection of faith and business. You know, we're all very familiar with the phrase, be fruitful and multiply. There's also allusions in Scripture to growth being a blessing and something that we're called to. Well, this is actually the subject of this podcast today, growing one's business. The topic, how to scale your business. And I'm delighted to have a particular person here today with me who is absolutely the right person to have, Dave Durand. He's done this multiple times, scaling businesses in different industries and businesses. Dave, I think you're going to love his zeal for life, his love of the faith, and his business acumen. A little bit about Dave. Dave is the CEO of Leading Giants, an influence mastery company. And I want to come back to that to get his definition of that. He's the executive chairman of Best Version Media, which just a few years or so ago was awarded one of the fastest growing media companies in the United States. Dave has built businesses with sales of more than $1 billion. He's trained more than 150,000 people. He has multiple podcasts, and he's an author. Dave Durand, it's great to be with you. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be with you. I relish these moments. You and I have so many of these conversations that are not actually being recorded, going back 20 years when we would just sit down, and I loved it because it was always like kind of a Catholic business retreat. You know, we would talk about efficiencies and, you know, driving revenues, but never separate from the idea of being good stewards with what's taking place. And they've been so it's amazing. You know, it's been decades of that. We must have started when we were 7.
Well, I think you look a little closer to that young age, maybe, Dave, than I do. But no, it really has been great. I always get energized when I'm with you. And I say this truthfully. You really have always been on my short list of people in this Catholic world who really have done great things, have tremendous capacity, and God has blessed you. And you have said yes, and you've returned the blessing to many people, including myself. Dave, before we maybe get started in the actual topic of how to scale your business, I'm intrigued with the definition of Leading Giants, an influence mastery company. What does that mean?
Really, anytime a person wants to extend their ability to get things done, they need to influence others. I mean, if you think about all great people in life, they influenced others. I mean, sometimes you think of an athlete and they won the game and they had the best hit, but they influenced the rest of their team. And quite often, because of their success, now they're influencing people in society too. But leadership in particular, people in sales, people in ministry, you have to master influence. And a lot of people don't understand how to do that. And they don't recognize that it's really not about what you do in life. It's about who you become when you do what you do in life that really matters. So, you know, if a person wants to build a business, sell it for $100 million or run for political office or become a second grade teacher, I'm happy to teach them how to be influential in that, no matter what it happens to be. But I want to make sure that I'm helping form the person, not just their skills and influence, because a lot of people use just techniques and not the core of what it means to be the right person influence.
Dave, can you repeat that phrase? There was a lot in there, becoming who you should be while you're doing it. Can you unpack that? Say it again and unpack that a little bit.
It's not so much. So a lot of people, okay, from just a secular perspective, people say, what do I want to do? I need to find something and follow my passion. I need to know what I need to do. And that's going to be the most important thing when I find that thing. As Catholics, we also understand that from the perspective of stewardship and vocation. What is my vocation? So people will sit in perpetual kind of discernment, whether they're discerning their career or whatever it is. But I say, hey, stop. Listen, you don't have to follow your passion. Bring your passion into the thing you're doing. And the way that you can look at this is a simple statement. It's not so much what you do. It's who you become when you do what it is you do that matters the most. And that kind of inverts a lot of the common thinking out there. But at the end of the day, if you do study people who've had great success and joy through the process, they bring passion to what they do as opposed to chasing their passion. And they're very, very interested in who they became through their work. And if they didn't become someone through their work, they're oftentimes a Hollywood person who committed suicide or had an OD because they accomplished amazing things, but their personhood did not grow in the midst of that.
I might come back to the question, like some people who you know in the secular world who you think maybe have anchored themselves and become the person, that they should have become. So maybe we'll come back to that question. Dave, you and I, again, we've had many conversations over the years, and in preparing for our time here today, for some reason, the first question that came up to me is, what drives you? I'm not sure that I've ever asked you that question. I think I've just kind of been in your tornado presence. But really, what drives you as a husband, father, Catholic, and entrepreneur? Maybe take one or all of them, whatever you want to do there.
Yeah, it's the same thing for each one of them. And I think probably one of the reasons you didn't answer is maybe you made the assumption, but I want to go to heaven. At the end of the day, that's what it is. I've built my companies. I've sold them. I don't need to work. My kids are out of the house right now. The allure of just kind of trying to better my golf game could be there. Although, if you've ever seen me golf, you realize that
is that a hopeless cause?
Oh my! Every golf course I've golfed on has a rash from me walking on it. But the idea though is that instead of taking that path, I want to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And you can't bury your talents when that happens. So that drives me to do what I do in the workplace, is to make sure that I don't bury those talents and I hear those words. It is what drives me in my own personal relationships. It's what drives me just as a member of the community and society and as a sinner. I mean, frankly speaking, I've got a lot of work to do. We're called to be perfect. Wow. Yeah. Okay. On the spectrum of perfection, there's just so much more work to do. And it drives me. I am driven to be perfect. Fully aware, by the way, that I'm never going to become perfect. And if I am, it is only through the grace of God who perfects me in his grace. But that's it. It is. I want to go to heaven. And that really, the older I get, Matt, the more that's the only thing that makes sense. It says literally this whole life does not make sense if it is not about going to heaven.
Well done. Well said. Were you entrepreneurial young? Were you always entrepreneurial, or did something click at some point?
No, I always was. I can remember being around the house. My family is mostly engineers. My dad was an engineer. My brothers are engineers. My two sisters went into teaching, although one of them has become a little bit more entrepreneurial. But I remember, they were talking about how, they can fix everything, and they're very handy. Okay. And I can be handy because I was raised by a great father who taught me how to do everything handy that I need to do. I just never had a great appeal to it. And I always found it to be, wait, I can change my oil in my car, but I can get that done in 20 minutes someplace else. Instead of doing it myself, it only costs 25% less to do it yourself. And what can I do with that extra hour? And that's, my mind thought like that immediately. We were sitting around the table one time and they were all talking about how handy they are. And I said, you know what? I can get all that stuff that you guys all said that you can do done in a way shorter period of time. And I can actually be on the beach while it's happening. They said, how are you going to do that? And I put the phone book on the table. And they laughed about that. But so I've always been an entrepreneur in some way, shape, or another.
Very good. Very good. So you're a father of six. I'm a father of six. I think we're, from what I see from you and what I see from you, we're doing a fairly good job. That being said, has it entered your mind, not as much with your kids, but maybe the wider culture, that if you're raised in suburbia, the average young kid, do they have the tenacity nowadays en masse, like, aggregate? Has that entered your mind at all? Any concern that you have for moderns, or you thinking, no, Matt, that'll work itself out. The certain percentage will rise. Or do you think we have something to concern about? Because, of course, the entrepreneurial spirit is really the engine of the country in so many ways over the past couple hundred years.
Yes, and yes. I think that there's a certain amount that's going to rise to the top. There's going to be natural things that happen. I've always been a little bit dubious about the idea of criticizing the next generation because I've always seen it as a bit of a rite of passage for every generation to talk about how great theirs was and how the next one is troubled. But I will say there are problems that have not ever existed at the level they exist today. And I think the reason for those problems largely are due to the immediate gratification that people get from social media. They use social media as a way to satisfy things that they would normally have been satisfied through hard work and effort.
Okay.
If you want recognition, if you want a reward, if you want to be respected, you needed to go out there and build something and do something to be respected. Now you can do some sort of silly TikTok video and all of a sudden you get all sorts of praise. I think another thing that's problematic about young people today is that their parents put them on these silly apps like Life 360 or whatever in the world they're called, where, and by the way, maybe when a child is super young and you need to keep an eye on them to a certain degree. But I remember for me, it was like when I was a kid, if I wanted to play a game, I had to recruit kids from the neighborhood. I didn't have somebody organize it. My parents were like, be home by sundown. I'd hop on a bike and I'd ride 12 miles to the next town with my friends. Now, kids are regulated at such a young age. Their parents can see where they go, what they do, how fast they drive, what they spend, who they spend their time with, everything about them. They can know where they are within 3 feet. Well, now they go to college and they're 18 years old, particularly men. You're an 18-year-old man, because you're not an 18-year-old boy. You're an 18-year-old man. And your mom sees this. And then you graduate now in 6 years instead of 4 years, because that's what people are doing. You're 24 years old. And your mom has controlled where you go, what you do, whether you speed, whether you don't speed, what you spend, where you've taken no risks. Every single part of your life is monitored. And so you are abundantly soft and afraid. So those are the types of things that concern me. Not to mention, what you've become? You've become very, very, very open to living in a communist society, which will monitor you the same way your mom did.
Sure. Dave, I just read, I think, an article yesterday, last night maybe even, where it spoke of the mental health issues becoming more problematic on kids who were sort of monitored more by their parents.
Absolutely.
And so I think I don't know. I've been intrigued with this question of, has affluence, how much has it helped or how much has it hurt our kids? All right. Well, let's jump into our topic, scaling your business. I think we're going to have some fun with this. I know you enough to know that your motivation, I believe, has always historically been for the kingdom and for the fun of the game. And often, finances, thanks be to God, can follow, and then you can do great good with those. So we're talking about scaling your business, and I'm actually going to ask you a question about scaling in just a minute. But can any business scale? Meaning, what about the guy who has a little briefcase, a little piccolo in the briefcase, and that's all he does is play for the New York Philharmonic? Assuming he wanted to scale, can even the piccolo players scale in your view? Or no, Matt, there are clearly things that are not meant for scale?
Yeah, I would say that, the only things that are not meant to scale are bad ideas that nobody likes.
Okay.
And, many entrepreneurs are a little bit like the parent of the second grader whose artwork is hanging in the hallway and they go, oh, I have a little Picasso. And everybody else is saying, hey, brother, that's not that good. Okay. So if we have a bad idea, it can't scale because we can't tell the whole world they're wrong about not liking it. You don't like my ice cream, you're tasting it wrong is a really bad sales philosophy.
Okay.
So, but if it's a good idea, it absolutely can scale. And even the piccolo example, there's an audience for that. And if he can record things and then find a way to sell them and reach that audience of people who like it, even if it's in kind of an obscure, offbeat way, people have actually done that sort of thing. And I like that you're using art as an example, because actually in one of my upcoming books, I use Dale Chihuly as an example of this. He was a glass blower. Okay. And some people are very familiar with him. If you've been to Bellagio in Las Vegas, in Las Vegas, and you walk in the Bellagio, he has this massive, massive artwork there all over the place. He was very popular, decades ago more than now, but he was injured a few times. And so he ended up building a large glass blowing art enterprise worth at the time, I think, $30 million in revenue. And I don't know its value, but it was $30 million in revenue. And that organization, he didn't do any of the glass blowing himself. He had artisans that did it, but used his name. Now, if you think of anything that you would be hesitant to actually delegate,
yeah, sure,
it would be something that's under the banner of artwork. And you and I think have talked about maybe even some authors who've done this sort of thing.
Yeah, James Patterson, a good friend of mine, Brian Gale, told me the author James Patterson, I think, is an ad man. He was an ad man, an advertising man, and he figured out how to write novels, and now I think he oversees people writing, I think, in his name and the James Patterson brand. And so I think that's, that kind of, I guess, gets to what you were suggesting. I have a handout that we're going to give to the audience for free. I'll mention it at the end. It has 10 concepts. I'm going to walk through, let's say 6, 7, 8, whatever we can get to in our time. You lay out 10 concepts on how to scale your business, 10 principles, concepts. So the first is, you say, can we, presumably the company, can we do what we're doing by 1,000? Unpack that for us. Well, having built a lot of businesses, I've recognized that if you walk in and you see a really good idea, you can expand it. And I remember one time I was a not so silent partner in a company that was incubating for about 5 years. And it was at about $500,000 in sales. And I at this point, I loved the idea so much that I went from being a not so silent partner. I was there from the beginning, but I just threw out a little bit of advice here and some money. But I decided to jump in as the CEO now and to really drive the business. And I remember speaking to my other partners and other employees there. I said, every single thing we have to do, we have to look at it times 1,000. And that kind of blew their mind because they were doing things like paying commissions on like a spreadsheet, and an algorithm it was horrible. And we didn't have a back office. But I said, listen, anything that we want to do by way of compensation, we have to be able to do that way. We have to be able to read our audience. We have to know our markets. We have to do every single thing in a way that we can do it times 1,000. That thinking really helped them. We went well beyond 1,000, and it went from $500,000 in revenue to hundreds of millions. But that wouldn't have happened had we pigeonholed ourselves by staying in this idea of doing the same thing the same way, as opposed to, when I do this once, can I produce a multiplier effect from the same activity? Mm-hmm. That's really essential. You speak of a kind of like a small growth mindset, a trapped mindset of kind of like 10% growth, or maybe it's 3%, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's, I think IBM shoots for like 4% a year or something like that. So let's attach that to the first one. Unpack that. Why is that a danger? How's that a danger? How are they connected? So they're connected because there are some entrepreneurs that enter into entrepreneurship maybe, as teenagers or right out of college or high school. And so they're not trapped by old thinking, but most entrepreneurs have some experience with another organization, and that organization is what teaches them how to perceive growth. So if you're in a $10 billion company and they're calling for 10% growth, that's $1 billion in growth. That's a very substantial job to do. Sure. But that doesn't apply to the person who has a popsicle stand selling 100 popsicles. I mean, you can grow by 100% by just selling 200 popsicles, which is no big deal to do that. But what about opening up 10 locations and then having each one of them grow from 200 to 1,000? So you don't want to get trapped in old thinking just because it was how you were raised in business and believe that, hey, if we grow 20%, since my old company grew 10%, we're twice as good at growth as they are, because it doesn't really apply there. And so we have a tendency to limit our ability to think about things according to the circumstance we're in, because we tie it to things that it really makes no sense tying it to. Got it. So this next question is a little bit self-serving here, but I think there might be fruit in here for all of our listeners. So the counsel I've given my own kids is go to college for a variety of reasons, and then go and work for the man for 5 to 8 years, because there's a host of disciplines and things that you can learn. Dave, when I started a business in college, I had to learn at my own expense, and it was painful, for X number of years. So I've become intrigued with the idea that if my kids have that entrepreneurial spirit, or anyone listening has that entrepreneurial spirit, to go and kind of learn, according to the world. But now you're scaring me a little bit. Obviously, that's hyperbole there, that maybe they might end up getting kind of tainted from some of the not bad things, but some of the mindsets of the corporate world.
Yeah, for me, I don't really have a formula for anyone on to go to college or not go to college or to work in an organization to be mentored or not, because I've seen people get bad educations and they learn how to not think after spending $750,000 in an Ivy League school.
Hmm.
Then I've watched other people, go to school and learn great things. I've seen people be mentored by great people in companies, and what they learned there formed them. And then I've seen other people just jump right into it, and they've got a natural knack for leading. So I think that's really according to who the particular person is, and their aptitude, their willingness to learn and grow, because they can learn as they're doing something quite often. And I've worked with a lot of young entrepreneurs that were radically successful at a young age, that did not go to school, and then vice versa too. So, it's very interesting. The MBA, Harvard grad, meticulous finance oriented entrepreneur who builds everything on a spreadsheet is one person who can be successful, but they can be abundantly failure. They can be total failures because of that. I mean, I know because I've hired some of them. Okay.
Sure.
And then at the same time, you've got somebody that's just got this raw goodness and virtue about them with a really good idea, and they know how to stick that thing out. And that's the thing about it. That's super important. Ideas are a dime a dozen, but people who execute on an idea, that's what really matters. So I always tell people, don't sit there waiting to have the world's best idea. And this is related to your idea about mentoring and going to college and coming up with something. Just have an idea that is basically an innovation. See, inventors are mostly poor. If you look at patent holders, most patents never make any money. And people always imagine their invention, because it's unique, making them rich. Most people innovate on something. Pizza existed. Tom Monahan made it a multi-billion-dollar business. Okay? There's a huge difference between the person who invents a pizza and a person who knows how to sell pizzas. And I think that we look at that second and we execute on it, and we're going to do much better most often.
Okay, so the first item is, can we look at something and how do we replicate it, carry it out by 1,000? The second concept, whatever I'm doing, can someone else do it? Specifically pushing things down to lower wage earners, or not in a mean sense, just in a business operation sense. So unpack this a little bit for us.
Well, I have a little bit of saying that I'm trying to free the world of the solopreneurship prison, one person at a time. So you have all these people that leave their work and they want to work for themselves. They become a solopreneur, and all of a sudden they feel like they're more trapped than they've ever been. There are some solopreneurs that find automated ways to have a good life and also build something with some freedoms. But for the most part, the solopreneur is a person who has no escape. They have to be there for their phone and check their voicemail and manage every single thing that they're doing, let alone whatever product it happens to be. They have to interact with their email. They're doing everything. And there are going to be parts of that they don't like. They absolutely don't like. The parts of that anyone can do. And I always tell them, listen, the role that anyone can do, you have to have somebody else do it. Oh, but I can't afford it. Yes, you actually can. Pull somebody in for 10 hours a week, pay them an amount that you can afford, even if you cut your pay or you borrow the money to do it, because it's not a lot of money. They're going to be happy about it. And what can you do with that extra 10 hours, especially if you direct it toward the particular skill that you have, the influence you have as a leader, or whatever unique skill you have that the business is centered around, where you're not doing things that anyone could do. That's a very, very bad idea. And then the things you don't like, you should also do this with, because those are things you have a tendency to not do and to put off or to do poorly. And that creates a lot of problems. Now, all of a sudden, you find yourself going from having that 10 hours of greater freedom, and maybe you just use it to be with your family or relax, and it regenerates you and allows you to be more effective. Or what happens is you now grow your business because that 10 hours is focused on growth. Now that 10 becomes 20, until all of a sudden you now have, 2 full-time people that are managing all sorts of things. You're bringing the business in, you're dishing off that additional work to those people who are thrilled about it because they're not an entrepreneur and they want this as a part of their life, because not everybody should be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
And then you start to realize even that individual skill that you have, you can start to shed, but that's kind of under the later question.
Very good. Okay, number 3, how do I harness technology to synergize? What do you mean synergize first, and then unpack the technology harnessing?
So a lot of things are scattered when you start a business. You have things that are not related. You're saying to yourself, oh, I've got my accounting department over here. I've got some elements of customer service right here, some elements of sales right here. You'll find that almost all these things are actually related in one way or another. And so you need to pull them together. Okay. The type of customer that you're actually going to see yields a certain type of sale or not. That type of customer, depending on who they were and what their demographic is, might be a longer term customer. So we should get rid of these non-profitable headache customers that take a long time. And how do we identify that? Well, by looking at our accounting systems. So you use all the information that you have to integrate things together, and then you harness technology. The second side of harnessing technology is that it should allow you, if you're building 1,000 widgets and it takes 10 people to do that, when you build 2,000 widgets now, you should be able to do that with only 15 people. Mm-hmm. And then 3,000 widgets with 17 people. Mm-hmm. Eventually, there comes a time where you hold at 17 and you can build even more. And now your technology is allowing you to be more efficient. But here's the key thing about this one, Matt, and this is what I've noticed. A lot of people say, hey, neat advice, Dave, but how do I do that? Mm-hmm. Well, the way that you do it is simple. You don't come up with the answers on your own. You just end up having great people on your team, and you deem them with the task of making it more efficient. And when you deem them with the task of making it more efficient, they're going to come up with ideas and technologies you've never heard of. But they're kind of a specialist in that particular area, and they know of other technologies and tools that are better. See, if you give your people the authority, the tools, the resources, and the time, including that as a resource, of course, to get things done, they're going to do way more than you could ever possibly imagine doing on your own, or that you could even innovatively think of on your own. And they're going to harness most of that within technology.
Yeah. So, Dave, first off, even as you speak, I'm playing scenarios from the past 25 years in my head, like, oh, wow, that could have worked there. It's almost as if I would need to be reminded, at least for a period of time, almost every day and almost every hour, to look at what I'm doing and maybe make that assessment. It's very hard to break out of those patterns. But let me move to the fourth concept, and then I want to share a quick anecdote and then get your comment on it. The bigger your organization, and I love this one when I read it, the more your responsibilities become known, and the goal is to move your responsibilities, plural, to responsibility, singular.
Yeah, the bigger you grow an organization, the less responsibilities you can manage, but the greater your responsibility becomes. You know, you wouldn't want to call the White House and have the president answering the phone and then saying, can you hold on for a second? I'm cleaning the carpets. Okay. These are responsibilities that he should not have. So you really want to look at this in your organization to say, the more that I'm managing all sorts of responsibilities, the less I can turn my attention toward the greater responsibility. I had somebody ask me this very high-ranking executive for a Fortune 10 company. And he said that he was giving a speech one time, and somebody asked him, who is more important, the entry-level employee who interfaces with customers or the CEO? And he said, I'll have to get back to you on that. And he gave it some thought, and the following day he said, it's the person who interacts with the customer, because the customer reputation is what's going to affect the rest of the business. So what do you think of that? I said, totally disagree. But see, the reason that you didn't answer it this way is political correctness. I'm going to give you the absolute answer. The CEO, by far, no question. Absolutely. There is no doubt about it. The most important person in an organization is the CEO. Are they of greater human dignity and value? No, it's not a contest about that.
Sure.
But who's the most important person in a company? And here's how you know that. The very people who say, well, I'm the most important person in the company, want to advance. And then once they advance, they don't think that person who they were is the most important person. It's now this level is the most important, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a self-righteous thing that they do because they also blame the CEO for everything bad. Well, the CEO has the power to make everything bad and the power to turn it around, AKA the culture, the power to create better opportunity, a non-toxic but a great culture, bigger opportunities, opportunity for advancement, spin-off companies so other people can lead, everything else that's associated. They're absolutely the most important person. And you can't pin them for everything bad and then say somehow they're not the most important person there. And so there's no doubt about it. And by the way, I don't say that just as a CEO. I've been a CEO of many companies, but I actually say it from every level. I mean, when I was flipping burgers at Hardee's, it was still the most important answer.
Yeah.
And it's a key thing to remember.
You know, there's a great line in the movie Margin Call. I'm not sure if you ever saw it. It chronicles kind of the 2008 crisis. Jeremy Irons is the CEOs, the top dog. They fly him in on a helicopter at 2 a.m. because a crisis is happening. And he says a line that I just thought was very, very cool. Do you know why I get paid the big bucks? One reason, in his English accent, one reason. To see what's going to happen in the future. That's my only job, and, of this financial services firm. And it really was a little bit like, maybe I've heard it before, but it was a little bit water in my face. Like, yeah.
Well, the only comment that I have on it is the only way you can do that is by relying on all sorts of smart people. That is an iconic movie scene in order for a person to seem prophetic and crystal ballish. But really, at the end of the day, they have to be a person who is assessing what those trends may be according to certain experiences. But quite often they're doing them by really intaking all sorts of insights from valuable people within their organization. Or if they don't have those people in their company, they're talking to other people to make those assessments.
Sure. Well, that actually leads perfectly into your fifth proposed concept. After you delegate the basic lower wage items, you need to do this at a higher level, the greater positions, and then you need to give them the authority, the autonomy, and the resources.
Yeah, this really gets into the idea of leading giants, right? The thing that I always say is, hey, if you do this, you can become a giant. We can go slay dragons together. Because people want an adventure in life. And your adventure in life is only given to you once you have a certain amount of authority. This is really an interesting thing. Even if you think in warfare, when you hand a young soldier a weapon, there's a lot of authority they now have. And you gave them that authority. Wow, that's pretty incredible. And when you think about higher level authority things that take place, in warfare or in business, people are they feel very fulfilled when they have power and authority. The only way that you can really expand your influence is to not die of decision exhaustion. And that's a real thing. And you know this because you've been a CEO yourself. So you're making decision after decision after decision, and you literally exercise that decision-making mechanism in your mind, which, by the way, is prudence, one of the cardinal virtues, and it's the charioteer for all of the rest of the virtues. But the better we become at it, the faster we become at it, the more effective we become at it. But at a certain point, we still have a limit. It's like lifting weights. You can only do so many reps to a point where your will and how strong you are and how much endurance you have doesn't matter anymore. There's only so much you can do. Same thing with decision making. So if you want to be able to make 10 times more decisions, then get 10 additional people, actually it'd be 100 times more decisions, really, if you start to multiply this, because they're going to also delegate further authority. If they're good decision makers, you have really, really expanded your ability to get things done. But you have to give that ownership, authority, power, and resources to people for them to be effective, or they're just going to resent you. They're like they're like a mouse in a cage that you're poking at.
You triggered a thought. I had a friend, he's 20 years older, but an acquaintance friend who was the head of a big hospital system. I think it was 15,000 employees. And I projected onto him my probably doing it wrong, and basically I remember saying to him, how do you do it with, I have 60 employees. You have 15,000. He said, no. I have a whole host of lieutenants who carry out their disciplines, their works, their departments, and they just report to me, and I have my meetings with them, and the machine goes. So that sounds familiar to you, I presume?
Yeah, very familiar, and that's an essential thing. That's why your span of influence, the number of direct reports that you have, really has to be limited to something that is effective. And here's one of the ways you know that it's not effective. It's too much when those people are saying that you're not available.
Wow, that's a key line right there.
That's really what it is.
Wow.
And if you are available to them and you can manage the weight of the decisions you need to make and assistance with them, then you're probably okay with your span.
Yeah, that's a concept that everyone who's listening hear that. If you can't be with your direct reports, you need to start pushing more down because you need to be free. Okay, let's go to number 6 of 7 because we tied number 8 to number 1 in the beginning. Am I growing the entity horizontally and vertically? And how can I grow both? And you referenced Amazon when we spoke earlier.
Yeah, so a lot of people can understand like horizontal growth in certain companies. I referenced Domino's. You take any sort of franchise that you can put on a separate corner anyplace else. And it's easy to say, well, that's horizontal growth. If you want to increase it by, 100%, you just open a second store, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it.
And that would be considered horizontal growth. The vertical growth would be making sure that each independent store is also growing.
Got it.
Okay, so if you're growing each independent store by 20% while you're adding 100 stores, you have remarkable growth. The reason I use Amazon as an example is a lot of people wouldn't say that. They say they have this storefront right here. It's one location and it's on your phone and everywhere you take it. Mm-hmm. But the distribution was a big part of that. And in order for them to be effective, they needed, in essence, what would be considered like an internal horizontal growth for the reach of delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So those are things to keep in mind.
Dave, I think this is a great one, the seventh one to end on. Again, we merged number 8 with number 1 in the handout that you helped put together for us, which we appreciate, which people can download for free. Just look in the show notes. The seventh one is really interesting to me when you shared it with me. You said, promote people with the highest virtue to the highest levels. I can guess at some of this maybe, but you're here for this very reason to tell us how we should think about this.
When you look at the careers that are disasters and fall apart versus careers that don't, the base core of it, it's decision making. Okay? The summary of success for most people, particularly in leadership, will be the weight of the good decisions that they've made versus the weight of the bad decisions that they made. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily even in quantity, because you could make 1,000 great decisions and one really bad decision, it could wipe the whole thing out.
Right.
Good decisions are made by virtuous people. And the virtue under the banner of good decisions is prudence, which is one of the cardinal virtues. And it's a natural virtue, not to be confused with faith, hope, or charity, which are theological virtues. The cardinal virtues are natural virtues that any single person has access to. And if you master prudence, you master decision making. And you don't have any access to the further virtues, or the amount of access you have to the further virtues is predicated upon the amount that you have actually built prudence. So you can't have justice without prudence, and that's the second of the cardinal virtues. You can't have fortitude without justice, and you can't have temperance without fortitude, which means they all build on each other. Now, you don't complete the task of being perfectly prudent before you can have some justice. Right. But to the degree that you have prudence is the degree that you can have justice, therefore fortitude, therefore temperance. So if you think about it, who do you want to work with and who do you want to lead your organization? A person who can't make good decisions, who has no sense of fairness, that will not grind through things when they're difficult and can't control their passions? Or the person who can actually make great decisions with a tremendous sense of fairness and justice, can grind through things when they're difficult and can control their passions? That's why I always tell people to look for those things first.
Wow.
And then, all things being equal, you want to make sure that they're highly competent, they're intelligent, all those things.
Love it. I mean, yeah, fabulous. What a great piece of content for this particular forum in general, but certainly for the wider world. Dave, what are you excited about now? What's your next phase? I believe Leading Giants is in its beginning months. I think it's going to have multiple facets to it. Maybe we can just unpack. Why don't you give us 30 seconds on what your hope and dream is for Leading Giants?
Well, thank you. We just launched Leading Giants just actually a few weeks ago. It's a culmination of 35 years worth of experience. The whole idea is to establish and shape great leaders so that they can maximize who they are in their lives. They can be their best self, which means ultimately speaking, be a saint. And for those people who don't adhere to the Catholic faith, because it's a secular organization, will train anyone to be effective, they at least will be attracted to certain virtues which lead to the transcendental desires of goodness, truth, and beauty, are part of all of our desires. And when a person desires that, they expand their influence. So I show people how to do this. And by the way, it comes down to the raw reality of, hey, you want to build a business? Let me show you how to do it. Expand, hire, recruit, train, run a sales department, how to manage things together, how to make entrepreneurial leaps. They're all practical elements in this, but I don't separate them from who you become when you do what you do.
Excellent. Dave, I'd be very surprised if you're not back on in the not terribly distant future. My sense is that we would have many dozens of things that we could speak about. Praise God for your yes, praise God for your gifts. And I want to remind everyone that we have a handout for you of 10 concepts that Dave, in his many years of forging forward, has put together specifically on this topic of scaling your business. Look in the show notes, and you'll see a link down there that you can get this for free. Dave, God bless you. Keep doing what you're doing. We need you out there, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much. Total privilege. I really appreciated it, and God bless.
Very good, very good. So thank you again for tuning in. Look in the show links for ways to follow us. We got some great topics coming that I think you're really going to enjoy as you and I and all who are listening try and live and thrive in that tension between the sacred and the secular, between the things of this world and ultimately our focus on the things above. Thank you, and join us again.